Hi everyone, and welcome to this session in conversation with Coney. My name's Ellie, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion we've got for you this afternoon. I think there's so much we can learn from the creative sector. So I'm really pleased to welcome today Tassos Stevens, who is the director for Coney and also a maker of projects as well, who's going to tell us a little bit about their work. So hi Tassos, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi Ellie, thanks for having me. Hello everybody, lovely to be here with you. And I am going to screen share. So this is me and Coney, and really I'm here to talk today about the power of play. And Coney is a charity based in London. And our mission is about making all kinds of play to spark change, and thinking about how we design play, kind of around starting points of who is it for, and also who is it made by and with, and then also what are kind of the hopeful impacts, and how can we design experiences that will bring audiences and players towards kind of realizing these impacts. And we've got kind of quite a line of interest, all of us as makers, in kind of wanting to kind of figure out ways of responding well to the planetary crisis that we find ourselves in now. And I want to give kind of a little bit of a whistle-stop tour kind of our approach, and the different kinds of formats that we've used, and then sort of open up for questions and discussions, kind of really also around these kind of starting points of who is it for, and what's the hopeful impact. So our approach is making play to spark change. We follow key principles in our ethos of adventure, curiosity, and loveliness, which is a much longer story to explain. I'll leave that for now. Play frames the experience from beginning to end for the audience, and that experience can happen over a long arc. Starts when people first hear about it, only finishes when people stop thinking and talking about it. And crucially, it's not just about designing kind of play, but also about kind of reflection, and how we can stitch reflection into an experience. Reflection is how we make meaning after an experience, and through this to spark insight that can potentially then be facilitated into action and change. That's kind of the approach and the broader strokes. To give you one example, first example, here's a project called How We Save the World, which was a commission from the Natural Environmental Research Council together with the Natural History Museum originally, and originally presented live as a kind of piece of immersive theatre, but then with the pandemic kind of adapted to be played over Zoom. And in this, the audience of hundreds, basically cast as travelers through space and time, and two performers who are storytellers who are taking you back in different scenarios into the past, where we maybe had a chance to change things, to do things differently, that might lead to a different kind of impact in the face of the planetary crisis. So, for instance, back to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in Lancashire, and can you convince the daughter of a mill owner to maybe listen to the Luddites, or to a house party in Clapton 2009, and can you convince the kind of partygoers there to start to change their behaviours? You're racing against the clock. You've got an hour in total, but actually, when you kind of come back to the present moment, it's what you've learned from these experiences that you can take into the present. And the final invitation to the audience is to write a manifesto together about what we can all do now. And this was kind of built around engaging the public with some very particular environmental scientists whose research had originally been shortlisted for a NERC prize, but also more broadly about as we're facing the kind of the crisis, which can be overwhelming, how can we kind of continue to kind of feel some kind of hope and some kind of agency, which I think is something else that very much that play can manage. So I wrote out kind of a little, just thinking about some of the projects that we've made kind of in this line, and thinking about some of the different impacts that play can have. And I'm going to kind of whiz through some projects which are kind of illustrate some of these. although like, yeah, many projects will kind of like have many of these impacts kind of inside them. Active and embodied learning. So the project called Temperature Check, which was a commission from the Wellcome Trust, and basically to teach people and to teach like particular kind of groups of like science kind of communicators and public about the co-benefits of climate adaptation for health, planetary health and individual health. So for instance, if we make a green space in a city, that can act as a kind of valve for like against like heat waves. But also it's kind of good for mental health and well-being. And so each like kind of small group of players like plays like a district of a city, and then making decisions in the face of climate shocks, like kind of whizzing over like 20, 30 years to see what happens if. So that's one project. Then sort of in terms of like motivating kind of engagements, this was a project for young people and families, commissioned from the National Trust for one of their properties, Poles and Lacey, and specifically for the grounds of the property. And young people invited into basically, like Phoebe, played by the actor Nem, who's there on the right, has this dream of becoming like an actual fully qualified park ranger. And the only way she can convince her boss that she's kind of qualified to do this is that she can prove her crazy idea that young people are the best people to be able to engage with like the natural world and kind of the countryside code and what it means to be a ranger. So then young people and families kind of set on a series of small adventures around the grounds of Poles and Lacey, engaging with the grounds and the kind of their plant and animal life in order kind of like to prove this. And the kind of these activities, they're motivated with a sense of like, with the kind of the quest and the challenge, how can we help her and how we can help her kind of convince her boss. And this kind of ran very successfully over a summer at Poles and Lacey. Another project, Hyperobjective, which I think is kind of an example of kind of like how gameplay can really help us understand systems in play and the properties of systems and the kind of experience of kind of being inside them, because games themselves are systems that and so Hyperobjective was a commission for the Financial Times, originally for ending up kind of at the kind of their Weekender festival, and it's about the hyper object that is the climate crisis, and what we sort of like we kind of built was something that we're going to give people an experience, like as a playable metaphor of like what, so like, you know, how people can respond to being inside like kind of this system where, crucially, as a species, I think we're really hardwired to like, prefer things where we can see immediately our own impact and get a sense of our own agency. And here we muck about with this. So the game is very simple. Everybody's given a card. As you can see, people are raising cards here. And there's a screen in which there's a number. And there's a very simple decision that people are making repeatedly about whether to raise a card or not when they hear a fanfare. The more cards are raised, the more that number begins to rise and then continues to rise. Now, there is a collective prize that everybody wins if and only if the score stays below 1,000. But every card has also got a number on it, and it acts a little bit like a raffle ticket. So when the number comes to a stop after the fifth fanfare, whoever's number is closest to the score wins an individual prize, literally of cash money. And some of the individual cards have a number on them which is greater than 1,000. So they're trying potentially to kind of make the whole thing kind of go up. And then we also we create uncertainty by telling the audience at the start that one of the rules that they're going to hear to the game is actually a lie, but they don't know which. And also, crucially, and this is hidden from people, but they gradually work it out, that the effects of raising card on one fanfare only really come into play on like the next two fanfares. So the impact of your actions is always in the future. Most audiences realise it's too late and usually collectively lose. And the only way around it is to kind of start quite early on organising, like kind of collectively. So we're modelling the features of like living inside this like super complicated hyper object of the climate system. But crucially, it's the conversation afterwards that, you know, to reflect on how you played and like what we can learn from this, like where that's kind of like it's kind of the most kind of crucial parts of it. Sorry, just losing my slideshow. So a game that we made called Let's Talk About Climate Change was actually like part of the bigger commission for How We Save the World from the National Environmental Research Council. And this is a game modelling the kinds of ways in which people dismiss a conversation about the planetary crisis. And Ellie, could I call on you?
Yes, of course.
Ellie's going to play the role of the dismisser for this. We're going to play one round of this, like over this platform. So, so everybody would have like a kind of hand of orange cards and green cards. The orange cards are dismissers. So I'm going to say, let's talk about climate change to Ellie, and Ellie's going to dismiss it by choosing one of those sentences. She's going to speak aloud. Let's talk about climate change.
I am going to choose, don't worry about it. Nature's amazing. It will sort itself out.
Okay, so now from the floor, you might choose one of any of your green cards, which are tactics, and where you might then try, say, like basically, like say a line, and take it in turns to play one of these green cards and say a line with it back at Ellie, and invite you to post these in the chat. And then Ellie is going to choose whichever one she thinks best. So Ellie, could you repeat your dismissal?
Sure, yeah. So don't worry about it. Nature's amazing. It will sort itself out.
And dismissal is the kind of things that people say in order to dismiss the conversation for whatever reason. It's too difficult or complicated or like whatever else is kind of going on. Like this is based on like research from NERCA funded like climate communications group, looking at how people like talk and think about the crisis. So can you use one of these tactics? Post in the chat. There is a prize. There is absolutely a prize.
There we go, motivating. So if you could, if you'd like to have a go, you can pop your answers in the chat. Perhaps Tassos, would you be able to give us an example to kind of kick people off?
Yeah, so I might sort of drop some cultural references and say like, yeah, I mean, nature is amazing, and it kind of it will, potentially it will sort itself out. But yeah, you're a big Doctor Who fan, Ellie. Like, and actually, my brain is going. Finding it difficult. Maybe this is the bad choice of. Anybody? I'll move on. This is like.
Could pick another one, if that's helpful.
Go on then.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, here we go. Sarah Jackson.
Oh, nicely done, Sarah.
That's great. That's kind of like you. Well, using any of these. Many people are rewilding their gardens to help amazing nature. Very nice. Anybody else?
Just giving a couple of minutes for people to kind of have a think. I was quite tempted by the choosing the one top right as well, which was about veganism. So trying to dismiss the conversation. You're not going to convert me to veganism, something like that. I know that veganism has cropped up quite a bit in different conversations over the last couple of days.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I myself was inspired by taking part in an artist climate lab like 3 years ago, and thinking about like the impact of diets. But I am very specifically not a vegan, but a vegan. Very deliberately, I'm vaguely vegan. In that I try to eat vegan sort of 80-90% of the time, but I don't beat myself up if I find myself in a context where that's really difficult, or if somebody's like kind of cook me food, kind of etc. And again, and allowing myself kind of for kind of occasional treats, and really kind of I think from thinking about it in terms of both that the impact is like not so much about like my direct contribution, so much as like what my actions can do to help shift the kind of the culture, and to kind of like influence other people, and also because there's the kind of weird thing kind of within like psychology, and I did a PhD in a different kind of psychology years ago before like running away to join the theatre, but where we're presented with something like that seems like hardline like veganism, people feel judged, even though they're not necessarily actually being judged, and people push back against that. So there will always be, if you say that you're vegan, then people will kind of will defend it and dismiss the difficult feeling around it in the same way that kind of like these dismissals happen, that the kind of let's talk about climate change kind of is modeling, whereas veganism usually makes people laugh, and then it's far easier to start a conversation. I mean, I persuaded my mum to go like meat free for at least one day a week, and she's now happily like on 4 or 5 days a week, whereas like vegan is just way too difficult. Alan Kennedy.
There's another great
suggestion
from Alan. So change is exciting. Sure, new species will just grow in different places. Excellent suggestion.
I'm going to continue with the other projects I'm going to talk about, but there's
Lovely.
any more kind of like attempts to try to convince Ellie to sort of talk her way past, don't worry about it, nature's amazing, it will all sort itself out, welcomed in the chat. Try to counter it, try to kind of find a way to, really it's about, I mean, the point in a way is about how do you continue the conversation. The kind of the subtext of dismissal is, I don't want to talk about it because I'm finding it difficult. But how can we kind of engage people and make people feel okay in that kind of conversation? Anyway, to continue, this is a kind of a game in development, very nearly due for release. A commission from Chester Zoo as part of their kind of campaign for sustainable palm oil, and kind of crucially also about looking at how to make a kind of systemic change on the level of a community. So like Chester Zoo have made Chester as a city like the first like sustainable palm oil city. And this is something for secondary school students, and we're taking the kind of the community, like the system of the school, and basically this is a game people would play on their phones, and it's a kind of sort of choose your own adventure game. But the kind of the premise is that you, high school student, it's a bit like Groundhog Day. You've got the power to jump back in time and replay a day. And then looking for something to do with that power, your pen pal in Indonesia writes to you to say that the kind of there's a patch of rainforest is going to be bulldozed the next day, unless an international organisation like an English high school kind of gets behind it. It's ridiculously kind of like pulp and kind of cartoon, and really like leaning into like the kind of the high school genre, then you have to basically try to change the school by figuring out who has power inside the system of the school. Like, so not just the teachers, but also like the kind of the drama student who's the heavy Instagram influencer, the newspaper editor who will publish like the right article, and then what are the right things to say in order to make those influences change. And then should you fail, which you will do the first time you try, you jump back in time and you play it again. So this is kind of, in a way, is more a kind of game about how do we change the system, and kind of it's a kind of lobbying and kind of campaigning. But because of course it's around the issue of sustainable palm oil, and really leaning into the kind of the pulp fiction, where we can kind of have kind of ridiculously heightened conversations where lots of facts kind of around why sustainable palm oil is the best choice can then be kind of can be dropped in. And in terms of kind of working, not just making things for young people, but also working where we're kind of centering young people themselves in the making. We have a group of young people called the Young Coneys, who are trained as young change makers. They're aged between 7 and 13. One of the projects that they did a few years ago was a collaboration with Greenpeace that was very specifically as a direct intervention, which I'm going to try. Although that link that I shared, I'm just going to just try. You can open it for yourselves. Just going to try and. Sorry, I'm trying to.
No problem at all. We can always.
Here we go.
Fabulous. We can always share afterwards as well if it's easier.
So hopefully you can all see this, and I'll play this out again.
The fancy con. We're going down to the fancy car industry dinner to provide health checks.
The diesel cars are making people's lungs yucky and bad.
Right, okay, I'll take that.
Sir, is your event more important than a bad life?
No, thank you.
It's important because children's lungs are being the most affected by air pollution.
They should listen to us because we're doctors.
Wait a minute! Cheating! It's not good to cheat when it comes to your health.
The car industries are still working with diesel because they might not know how bad it is.
The air is probably the most important thing on earth, and we don't want to ruin it.
Brilliant.
So yeah, this was an intervention, as you saw, outside the kind of car industry awards dinner, specifically targeting Volkswagen, who had cheated on the kind of emissions tests from their vehicles, and around diesel air pollution. And Greenpeace, we kind of work with Greenpeace and other projects that I'm not allowed to talk about, but they kind of approached us, and they had the kind of the concept of having very young doctors offering health checks, but then worked with a group of the Young Coneys in order to devise exactly what was going to happen. And I think kind of crucially, just sort of the experience the young people had in making, earlier that year, they made a piece of immersive theatre for grown-up audiences called The Droves, and the kind of the skills and the confidence that they then had from that experience that they were then able to drop into, as you can see, as Greenpeace beautifully documented, how they were in having those kind of conversations with the car people, I think that's also seeing how the kind of the experience of play can also be kind of a training, particularly for young people, like sort of for more direct kind of like action intervention, because maybe that's what's needed. And yeah, right now we are so it's doing the sharing thing again. So that was Codename Violets. So yeah, we are working on a couple of new projects. We're developing a box project like for schools, where like a box lands in the school, like, and facilitated by the teacher who's playing like ignorant but actually in on it, opens up like a series of like missions and adventures. We've developed this kind of format for sort of like kind of engaging students with kind of like well-being, like in the kind of like the action of taking care for other students and like in making lovely things happen inside the school. But now want to kind of develop this format into engaging students with the impact of the climate crisis in their own community and their lives, and also like how can we channel like kind of feelings of eco-anxiety kind of like into something like kind of positive and constructive, so they understand their own agency and influence with grown-ups, and with an event at the end connecting them with the grown-ups of their own community for an intergenerational conversation about change. And we're also developing a story game about rewilding and nature-based solutions for different groups of people, but who all have a stake in a place, whether that's like a city or a region or like smaller or larger, and like together kind of like imagining like how a nature-based approach could transform this place. And those are both in development at the moment. And yeah, really sort of interested to, I guess now that's as much as I prepared to share, which actually kind of like, it's got to give us kind of good amount of time for any kind of questions and discussion. But I'm also sort of interested to hear any questions at all, and also there's kind of questions that like kind of maybe back the people in the room that sort of are thinking in terms of like what the things you want to happen, to make happen. Some of the starting points that we were always like using, like in terms of like kind of designing anything like to play, is who is it going to be made for, as well as like by and with, and what's the hoped impact. So any thoughts people have around those, we're really happy to sort of like to hear those and talk about those if that's helpful. Yeah, so over to you all.
Brilliant,
yeah.
Thank you. So if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. We've got a great question from Sarah here, who's interested in rewilding and nature-based solutions package. Who is the target audience for that?
We're still figuring that out, and we're actually really open to like what sort of like ideas that there might be. This is kind of being developed by one of our makers, David Finnegan, who's kind of and landing upon this in terms of like how can we think to like more positively about like what we can be offering to people in terms of like how to engage, particularly in the UK, and kind of thinking about two possibles, like maybe working within a particular kind of urban community with kind of groups of school students, but also with kind of grown-ups, with that grown-ups that might be from their family or other like networks kind of around them, and it might join kind of part of the box format, but also interested in exploring in communities where there might be a debate between and with like farmers who might be resistant to this, and how a piece like this might then be like a spark for a better facilitated conversation between groups like who might have different interests. But we're really also like really excited to hear if anybody in the room has kind of got ideas of like who target audiences and that context could be. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And also like what we can make in terms of missions for to help different ways people can engage like with what is there. Yeah, thanks. Great question, Deanna. Yeah, we do a lot to measure the impact, and designing like, you know, impact like through this, like from the beginning of an experience, like you have to do that, but also understanding that actually the understanding the impact, I would say, is lastly for the measurement, and like primarily has got to be also sort of be for the people who are like taking part in this. So however you're doing the kind of impact has got to feel like fun and meaningful and relevant for them as much as it is like for you as an organization and for your stakeholders. So it doesn't just become some kind of box ticking, but also that you can design for that impact kind of like inside it. Like what are the sort of the, you know, how can like part of the kind of at the end of like of a live experience, like people might be challenged to go and do something which would like, literally be like, the impact that you hope, and still kind of supported within the fiction that they then be kind of communicating maybe later by their phones, and then you're giving them kind of like another part of the tailored experience where they're doing the things that you hope for them to do. And yeah, I think sort of I mean, and how the messages kind of get across and activities aren't just seen as games. I think that that's really about the kind of conversations that you have kind of around them and like and after them, and it's kind of, I mean, the only I don't mind if things are seen as like just games in some ways, if that is something which then kind of like encourages people to want to play, and you know, the experiences have to be fun and engaging for playing audiences. Like otherwise, if not, then nothing's going to happen. Like but yeah, when we were thinking, I mean, it's very much like part of the design process to think about like who is this for, how will they see it, and how do you sort of like, yeah, bring people through it, and kind of engage them like all the way through, and then particularly like, yeah, what is the kind of conversations that can kind of happen in and around and after play that then leads to kind of the insight and kind of the impacts that might happen.
So you mentioned in your about two quite different audiences, so that your kind of urban communities and also the farmers. Do you ever kind of adapt a game or a piece to kind of fit different audiences, or is it very much kind of back to the drawing boards?
Yeah, it really depends. Sometimes we can take something that already exists and we can adapt it, and often you can kind of like take out some of the, I mean, the process of kind of making games anyway, you're always taking like different like mechanics and like kind of mechanisms inside a game, and like in one game and applying them like somewhere else. But I think it's also like in terms of like designing experiences, it's really important like to be designing as much as possible like with the people that it's for. Like so with the projects like that are landing in schools, we're actually kind of like working with small groups of the young Coneys, like kind of our young change makers, who are kind of effectively representative of the young people who these will be landing for, and they help us design them better, like to make sure that they land for that. If we were, so I mean, the rewilding nature-based kind of game is very much at the moment we have like kind of a story game mechanic, and like it's kind of like it's a half finished game. But I think, you know, if we were going to be say developing something to land like to be spark conversation with the farming community, we would be like having conversations like as part of the design experience, like with farmers to better understand where they're coming from, and then designing with that in mind. And that also really helps with kind of like designing for impact as well, because you're not designing like in a vacuum.
It sounds like from your projects that you've got a real mix of kind of in-person experiences, like you're talking about the box within the schools, but also kind of online experiences as well. Have you had more of a shift to online in recent years, or are you still kind of doing a bit of a mix of both things?
It's a bit of a mix, but I mean, I think we've always like also been using like different kind of content platforms, and not just online. I mean, like the kind of the box, like it's a physical parcel that's delivered. I really love parcels, in experiences, like but using like different also like sort of digital comms platforms that you can simple things that like for audiences, so like prefer not to use anything that requires download because that's a barrier, but using like a kind of magic phone system that's, you know, people can send text messages and receive calls, messages back, or we can build like simple, like things that feel like apps but actually just played in the browser, like High School Time Traveler. But I think also it's like the focus has got to be really on not so much on the tech so much as like what is it trying to, like, what is it doing, and like, and how is it like how are you kind of connecting with people like through the experience, and why, like, and also sort of interested in like as much like how you might be making something, say using a phone to deliver that to an audience, but that might then get them to play with their kind of their environment around them, or facilitate them playing with other people in person. So it isn't just kind of like around like playing inside the screen, it might be playing like out and about around, but facilitated by the screen as a delivery mechanism, but that's it.
We've got another comment here from Sarah.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to talk to you more about that, Sarah. I'm also at the moment reading a book about natural navigation and other like sort of tips for how you can kind of like engage and orientate using like what you can see kind of around you, like in of the natural world, but even within a city environment. And I'm sort of really interested in kind of developing little training kind of games, kind of like that's embedding like that kind of like engagement as well.
And are any of your the games that you've talked through, are they available to other people to kind of commission from you? Or?
Yeah, absolutely available for commission, but also like just available to play. Like a lot of them are like just kind of there and free to play. And I'll just stick my feel free to be in touch. Question from Chris Ablett: the best play experience I've ever done as a participant and use it as inspiration. Blimey, that's a great question. I think actually yes. Answering the second part first, there's a piece that I experienced. I was in Tasmania like 10 years ago for another project, part of a festival, and another piece that was made there called The Pact by an Australian artist called Thomas Quirk, and like working with like local teenagers. And basically you went to a cafe of a department store and sat down on a table opposite a teenager, and I was sitting opposite a 16-year-old boy. You don't communicate verbally, but we passed a phone like to swap notes. And then, but the pivot of it is you then both put on headphones and listen simultaneously to him telling the story of something that happened to him when he was younger, about his dad had been very ill and been in hospital. He visited him every day, and his dad would always say, "Don't say goodbye, never say goodbye," because that means that you have kind of forever. So he would always say, "See you," like, or kind of other things. And then one day, the boy forgets and says goodbye, and the next day his dad doesn't correct him. The next day his dad has passed. And this sort of, and he's telling you this through a recording, whilst sitting there listening to it, kind of listening to you, like as you listen to it, kind of as well. And it was really overwhelming, and incredibly moving. And then at the end, he sort of like asks, "Will you make a pact? Will you make a promise? Something that you will do?" And I've made a pact to say that I will never say goodbye to anybody unless I know it's for good. And 10 years on, I still kind of observe that. And yeah, it's kind of inspiration both for the kind of the power of what it is to be able to like bring a young person, like, and really clever the way that you hear in their recorded performance, but they're still live and present with you, and that's a very powerful combination. But what that can inspire in terms of like how to sort of like something that's basically changed one small part of my life forever. That's a huge inspiration.
It's really powerful. It sounds really moving. Brilliant example. Do you have any kind of top tips, I guess, for engaging audiences with interactive experiences and games, or perhaps any pitfalls?
I think top tips would be you're always developing like with audiences as much as possible, and like, you know, make something as quickly as possible that you can play test and learn through playing and like observing how people play, and also that kind of dialogue, like, you know, kind of like the more you can be having conversations or kind of collaborations with people, the representatives of kind of the groups of people that you want to be making this like for, better kind of craft the experience will be. Thinking about, you know, making a space for reflection. And obviously people, you know, we reflect after any experience. It's kind of what, yeah, it's what you do. We kind of come out of the theatre and like, you know, how was that for you? Like, but I think that often those conversations can fall away without some kind of scaffolding to support that. And the more that can be stitched into the experience itself, so that it feels like it's still part of it, it's still kind of like heightened, it's still relevant. That's kind of crucial. And I think also thinking about the impact from, and the kind of what happens at the end and afterwards, like right from the beginning, and designing like with that in mind. But remembering also people won't play necessarily the way that you want, and like people will push back against it, the feeling that they can be forced to play. So how can you sort of like make something which is open to what people want to bring, but will still like make that kind of crucible for change happen? I could go on. It's kind of my job, really. But yeah, and the pitfalls are basically like, doing any of those, but particularly thinking that's like, if you don't think about audiences as being different people, different from each other and different to you, crucially, and then the immediate trap you can fall into is like, oh, I will find that fun, therefore audiences will, like, and that ain't necessarily so.
I guess then what you were saying about kind of working with those audiences is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are almost out of time, so we're going to wrap up there. So thank you so much, Tassos. It's been really interesting to hear about your work, and we'll certainly be following up on your project as well around nature. And so yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thanks for being here, everybody who is but a small changing number of like little faces I can see. But yeah, hope that the rest of today is fantastic, and yeah, brilliant.
Thank you so much. Bye.